Good evening. On behalf of the Walter Martis Center and the Economics Department, I would like to invite and welcome everybody to the 2009 Heisler Business Ethics Lecture. Is this on? Yeah. Tonight's topic seems to be rather appropriate. Recent major frauds and business oversight. When you consider the situation of Madoff and some of the other things hitting the press, topic couldn't be more appropriate. So I'm looking forward very much to hearing from tonight's speaker, Mark Morze, and what I would like to do is introduce Yank Heisler, who will formally introduce Mark. And Yank is part of the family of the Heisler family that endowed this lecture series, and it's just wonderful to have you and be part of the today's special occasion. So why don't I turn it over to you?
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, John, and thanks very much to Ohio Wesleyan for carrying on a terrific gift. My Uncle Jim was a fantastic gentleman. He was a businessman who was only able to be at Ohio Wesleyan for 2 of the 4 years, called back because of a family business environment that he was in, and always cherished those 2 wonderful years that he had at Ohio Wesleyan. Thankfully, my father and then another uncle came to Wesleyan also and had a chance to graduate a little bit further along in time. Jim Heisler was an ethical man, as you might have guessed from this lecture topic. To his last breath in 2005, he always asked about this particular series because this particular gift meant so much to him. He was never able to be here, though. And luckily, I was asked as the next generation down to participate, and each time I would come back from Wesleyan, he wanted to know about the speaker, about those who attended, about the students, and their interest in this fantastic arena of ethics. If we went back just a few years to the turn of the decade, we probably reflected on the Enron and other institutional issues that occurred in that period and said, wow, this kind of situation from a business ethics standpoint might not happen for a long, long time. As John Booth just said, we're upon it again. And from a business person, one who's been in the business community like I have, it's very discouraging to have ethics fall so far down the curve. And we get into a situation with almost every day reading a newspaper story about ethics having gone bad. Tonight's presenter gives us a very interesting perspective. In his earlier days, Mark Morze wasn't the most ethical businessman. In fact, somebody discovered that, and Mark Morze paid the price. One of the things he told me tonight that was critical in his change to become such an advocate for ethics, to become such a renowned speaker about this interesting topic, is he admitted early on that he made lots of mistakes, and lots of those mistakes were on the ethical side. So from the valley where Mark Morze was to somewhere in the ethical peak as he presents to us this evening, you'll see quite a story. I'm not going to go over that story because I think in an academic environment like this, everybody here is a pretty good reader, and you'll have a chance to cover this. So you can cover it at your leisure. But remember, this is a person who was at the bottom and now is at the top. And my uncle couldn't have been more satisfied or more pleased to have this kind of presentation for all of us. Thanks.
Thank you.
It always fascinates me when I get a round of applause because I spent 53 months in prison, and to be very blunt, I'm I'm not a very good guy. I was very unethical. I gave in to temptation and paid a very heavy price for it. A lot of people think there are things called white-collar criminals, white-collar prisons, where we go and play tennis and golf and discuss our stock portfolios. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I will pay for the rest of my life for my ethical misconduct. But hopefully by talking to students especially you students, maybe I can make some amends for what I did so easily not that long ago. Why should you, good, honest people, many of whom are going to earn less money in your lifetime than you really should, because your companies are going to be paying a lot more for liability insurance because of me. So if when the talk is over, if you want to come up and kick me in the shins, that's okay. I also want you to know that this microphone here is for questions and answers, and I'm going to leave a really good sufficient time at the end of my talk for Q&A. You can ask me any question you want. You can ask me about prison. You can ask me about what it's like to be a disgusting thief. You can even ask me what it's like to play on the UCLA football team against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl when we won. So you can ask me about that one anytime. I've memorized that one. Now, the reason you should listen to someone like me is probably best exemplified by something my grandfather said to me one time. Now, my grandfather started late in life. When I was 18, he was 98. And he took the train out from Detroit, Michigan to Los Angeles, California to watch me play in a high school championship football game. And I assumed that that would probably be the last time I saw my grandfather. And he was always someone that was bigger than life. And he would always answer questions that I asked him with a cliche. He never gave a straight answer. Maybe you have family members like this. They can't give a straight answer. They've got to tell a little story, or they've got to say something that you don't understand. And my grandfather always spoke in cliches. And when he came out, I said, Gramps, is there anything special you want? I didn't say this, but I thought, since I'm probably not going to see you again. And he said to me in that inimitable gruff voice that he had, he goes, well, Mark, he goes, I started smoking a corncob pipe a couple of years after the Civil War. He had friends that fought in the Civil War. And he said, I started when I was like 8 years old, and I've had a cigar every day of my life through my adulthood. Up until a year ago when the doctor said, you got to stop, because you might die. I said, oh, Gramps, that's pretty bad. He goes, and I've been drinking rot gut whiskey and Jack Daniels even longer than I've been. But I had to give it up because I might die. He said, but Mark, there's one thing I really would like to do before I die. I said, what's that, Gramps? He said, I want to eat a pizza. He had never had a pizza in his life. Now, he grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and he's eating things called kielbasa's. You ever know what a kielbasa is? It's like a bomb that goes off in your stomach. He probably had 40,000 of these in his lifetime. But my grandmother goes, oh, no, you can't eat a pizza. It's so greasy, you'll die. And he goes, then I'll die happy. Woman. He always said woman. And I said, Gramps, do you have any advice for tonight's football game? Well, before I asked him that, I went and got him a pizza. And I said, what do you want on it? And I thought, you don't know what you want on it. You never had one. So I got everything. Pepperoni, mushrooms, sausage, pineapple. After all, it is California. And he looked at it with a twinkle in his eye. He looked at me, and the whole family's watching. And he says, Mark, I have one question. I go, what's that, Gramps? He goes, do I eat it or did I eat it? And I went, you're still sharp, Gramps, still sharp. And I said, do you have any advice for tonight's game? And he said, dance with the girl you brung. And I went, what the hell does that mean? But for you youngsters, you don't know, some of you oldsters don't know, But that means stick with what got you here. If you threw the ball well all season, throw the ball. If you ran the ball, run the ball. In my case, if you drop the ball, drop the ball. But he said, stick with what got you here, and you have a chance of winning. And that was his cliche for that day. And if he were here tonight, looking at you, he would look very old, and he would say to you, if you want to build a better hen house, ask a fox. And I'm the fox. I'm one of the handful of people that has lectured at the FBI Academy. As I mentioned earlier to some people, one of my other fellow criminals also lectured at the FBI Academy. He had a movie made about him, and it starred Leonardo DiCaprio, and I think that's very unfair. But so be it. But the FBI tells me that what I taught them works, and I've had many FBI agents come because they heard I was speaking somewhere and came to listen to me. And as you can probably imagine, that's a pretty hostile audience. I mean, there were men in that audience who arrested me and handcuffed me and yelled at me. And so I'm very proud to have taught there. I've taught at dozens and dozens of major universities of the Ivy League, at Pepperdine University, the most beautiful school on the planet, and at Ohio State University, close by, and at many, many other schools and universities. And I've lectured over 40,000 lawyers and accountants, and I've received over 1,300 letters from those accountants and lawyers and MBA students and business executives and even a couple bankers, for God's sake, saying that using your method helped us find fraud. 1,300 letters of people who found fraud using my methods. Now, we don't have much time tonight, and the methods I use aren't really about ethics, but the reason you should use them is because of ethics. Unethical behavior is helping to destroy a lot of businesses, and it's the reason we're in the crisis we're in right now. Unless you've been living in Mongolia, you know that the subprime bank loan problem and bungling therein has caused us so much grief and has seriously hurt our economy. And a lot of people are wondering if we're going to survive it. I've actually seen CNN said, do you think America will go bankrupt? Well, don't count on it. It would take an awful lot for us to have to go to court and file Chapter 7. But every step of the way in those subprime loans, there were ethical lapses. There are no heroes. 73% of all of the subprime loans that Countrywide, remember that company that used to be worth a lot of money? That Countrywide approved had fraud in the applications. So meaning the people who borrowed the money lied. Now, one of the reasons they lied is because the people telling them how to fill out the loan application encouraged them to just say whatever it would take to get the loan. So they're to blame too. The bank itself was to blame because they didn't do oversight and approve loans that I don't care what any government agency said never should have been approved. And lastly, they received a lot of commissions and deliberately allowed stock to go up to a level that they knew was not true, which is probably a great example of a lack of ethics. There's plenty of blame to go around. I never get partisan or political, but I can tell you there's as many Democrats that messed up as Republicans, so they're all to blame, and a curse on both houses. But what is kind of ironic is that everywhere I go right now, I hear the government needs to do more regulation. Anybody heard? We need more regulation. And the new word is transparency. I love that. The older was synergy, now it's transparency. Well, think about what that solution says. It basically says to all of you honest businessmen and a couple of us dishonest ones that we're incapable of doing the ethical and right thing because it's the right thing to do. We need some heavy-handed other entity to make us act ethically, and I don't believe that. I believe that a program like this, when Joanne, where is Joanne? Is she in here? First asked me to do this, I was so happy. I went online and listened to former speakers. And I thought, this is going to be a real challenge. I hope I can measure up. Because I believe that every single person in this room can and will act ethically if we give you a chance, and we act like we expect it. If my grandfather were here, he would say, Mark, don't act ethically because I told you to. Don't act ethically because somewhere in a book it says you should. Do it because it's the right thing to do. Now, there are two companies in the United States now that have done more business and made more profits in the last couple of decades than almost any other companies. And they did it because when called into the biggest single challenge of their lives, they opted to do the ethical thing over profit. Now, they're called Tylenol, Johnson & Johnson, and one of them, it's almost silly, is Harrah's Gambling Casinos, which I knew surprised you guys, I bet. Johnson & Johnson, when we had a Tylenol scare, said, I don't care what it costs, we are taking every bottle off the shelves. They invented the safety cap long before the government told them to. They stuffed the bottle with that cotton so you can never get it out, but that's another problem. And they made those safety caps so safe, I have to get my 7-year-old nephew to open the bottle because I can't do it. That cost them hundreds of millions, probably billions of dollars. And now you talk to every hospital administrator in America, and they say, oh, we only use Tylenol. It's not even the cheapest pill at all. But they said, we do that because when called to the fray, Johnson & Johnson stepped up and said, to heck with profits, let's do the right thing. Now, my other almost silly example of a gambling casino is that the said, you know what? If we discover that we extended too much credit to somebody who's an addict and they lose a lot of money, we're going to forgive the debt and send them home. Now, both companies put themselves at a very distinct financial disadvantage vis-a-vis their competitors. But both of them did the right thing. And now they reap the benefits for it. Because the simple truth is this: ethics in business is not an oxymoron. And as silly as it sounds, ethics in business is good business. It makes money. It earns goodwill in 1,000 different ways. It is something that good people who are raised properly do automatically, but it's also something that a person like myself could learn even after I violated ethics so egregiously. I got investment banks to commit over $4 billion to a company that virtually didn't even exist, that I'd helped fabricate and manufacture with forged documents, with lies and more lies and more lies. And in the end, I went to prison. My CEO went to prison. 1,200 people who had counted on me lost their jobs. And an awful lot of bankers and accountants really hate my guts. But I can tell you now, as I have over the last 15 years, and over 40,000 different students that I've lectured in person, that I have seen the light. Now, you don't have to believe me. The simple truth is, Gary, I don't get out here all that often. So I don't care if I ever bump into you again and you say, Mark, I don't know whether to believe you or not. The simple truth is, I learned that truism that I said before, that it is good business to be ethical and to not lie. Whenever I'm asked by FBI agents, who now, believe it or not, are friends of mine, You spend enough time with guys, and their attitude I'm very gracious for was they said, you know, Mark, you didn't murder anyone or molest any children. You screwed up. You're going to go to prison. You're not going to get a slap on the wrist. You're going away for years. But they said, over the last 6 months, we've learned that this was kind of an aberration for you. And I'm proud to say it was. I'd never broken a law before. I never even inhaled. You know, I mean, think about that. Well, okay, maybe once. But the simple truth is that I've seen the light, but it's too late for me. You know, there's a philosopher once said, a man loses his honor only once. And I lost mine. And doing talks like this is about the only way I can get a modicum of that honor back. Now, I teach an 8-hour seminar. Can you imagine being stuck in front of me for 8 hours, listening in minute detail how I manufactured thousands of documents, how I lied and lied and lied, and how I got the trust of people and misused it. But these accountants and sometimes lawyers sit there and they listen to the whole thing, and I teach them specific tools that they can actually use to help detect and deter fraud. Now, why is that so important? Every facet of our slumping economy has been exacerbated because of ethical lapses and fraud. Bernie Madoff lies about a number that we don't even know, but we've been told by the FBI that it's somewhere between 50 and maybe even as high as $100 billion. And on a spectrum of evil, I would say he ranks pretty evil because he targeted charities, friends, and other people who had been his confidants and trusted him his whole life. When I was in prison, I'm proud to say I wasn't the most hated man in prison at all. That was reserved for a man some of you have heard of named Ivan Boesky. And that's because Ivan wore a microphone on his body after he got caught and deliberately tried to get his friends to break laws. When it turns out you did that and you go to prison, bad news. Prisoners do not like snitches. And the most despicable character, of course, of all was Charles Keating, who deliberately targeted the elderly and sold them worthless products and ruined their limited retirements. And on a spectrum of evil, I belong on that spectrum, but I'm slightly to the left of Madoff and Keating. But those things only happened because those men, in their greed, were living in sort of a vacuum. And it keeps on happening. People have asked me, Mark, could you commit your same fraud today, or are there too many checks and balances? And I said, are you kidding? If I had had a scanner, I'd be a zillionaire. I'd have never been caught. Fraud is much easier now. And to its credit, the Securities and Exchange Commission is using the stick and carrot attitude to try to bludgeon people into being ethical when I just wish we could call on our better persons to be ethical, but they're basically saying we are not competent enough to police white-collar business. It's too hard to do. And so what the SEC has said is we're putting the chore on you, on your shoulders. All of you who are students here, who are going to go out and get a job, if you're lucky. The economy's kind of bad, you might have noticed. And when you do, you're going to make decisions all the time as to what's the right thing to do. And all you've got to say to yourself is, would I be proud of the decision that I'm making? Could I brag about it? And if the answer to that is yes, then you're probably doing the right thing. And if the answer is no, I doubt if any carrot or stick is going to get you to do it. But as I've said before and I'll say again, it's good business to be ethical. Now, I used a lot of trickery and a lot of deceit to get good people, people just like you in this room, to do things that you probably would not normally do. And I played on human frailty, like greed, like laziness, like pride and arrogance, to get people to let me push the limits as far as they would, raise hundreds of millions of dollars, get commitments for billions, and aggrandize myself, get rich. And I was asked at dinner, what was it like to go from being worth about $90 million to being worth $0 overnight and being thrown into a prison where I personally witnessed many murders and rapes and attacks. And I said, it sucked. But I said, I brought this all upon myself. Because when I got the sign of temptation put up in front of me, I gave into it. But what's even worse is as I look back on those times and decisions, and I can tell you at least one thing, with all the money I had and all the cars and all the power and all the material objects, I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy because I hadn't earned it. And I had an epiphany in prison, which happens a lot. And I made up my mind that I would try to spread the word to anybody who listened, not to do it the way I did. Now, I give these lectures, and sometimes people say, gee, Mark, are you here to kind of scare people into having good behavior? And the answer is no. I don't believe there's one person in this room who's going to commit a crime and get in trouble. But I can tell you this, if a fraud happens near you, or on your watch, or in your company, or in your firm, or at your university, or at your church, the stain of that will stain every single one of you. I asked this rhetorically, how'd you like to be able to say to people when they go, gee, where have you been working the last 10 years? And you go, oh, I worked for Enron. You think you'd be proud of that? You'd be ashamed of it, even if you didn't do anything wrong. Now, I can say this about deterrence. Altogether, well, there's a name I'd like to throw out. The name is Jeff Skilling. He headed up Enron. And Jeff Skilling and his cohort, Ken Lay, broke the law and got convicted. Lay beat the rap, but he paid a heavy price. He died, so that's not a real good idea. And Skilling will probably die in prison. And there's a guy below Jeff Skilling named Andy Fastow, and he's in prison. And there's a guy below Andy, whose name I don't know, but he's in prison too. And there's a guy below the guy below Andy, and he's in prison too. And there's yet one more guy below the guy below the guy below Andy, and he's scared that he's going to go to prison. Now, I never say this to demean anybody. Some one of you in this audience could easily end up being the next billionaire who owns Google or something. But realistically, every single person in this school, whether you're in business, accounting, economics, liberal arts, could easily find yourself during your career as the guy below Andy. And you're going to be called on to make decisions on a daily basis that will affect you and literally could send you to prison, or worse, could ruin your reputation and maybe possibly ruin your life. And I can tell you this, when you go, if you were to ever go to prison, the odds of you staying married, if you're married, are less than 5% if you only serve 2 years. So if you have a family and people that you love, don't do it. If you have to look at a situation and say, I'm torn between whether or not I should do this or not, you know what? Don't do it. Always take the moral high ground, even if nobody's watching. Don't cheat on an exam just because nobody's watching. Now, it sounds a lot like I'm just being a kind of a preacher. And I haven't talked very much about what is really my lifeblood, which is accounting minutia and business minutia and reporting minutia, because I don't think that's apropos for the topic. I could easily teach anyone in this room the techniques that I have, and they would find fraud. Some of the advice that I will give people is when you're asking the right questions of something you find suspicious and wonder if you should be involved in it, you should always ask yourself, what is it I'm being asked to believe? What is it I'm being asked to react to? When I would tell people lies, people never questioned them. They were too busy trying to get ahead themselves. They weren't breaking the law, but they never put my feet to the fire. You know, almost humorously, I should tell you this. Do you know how often people who ask questions, people like yourself, will give the answer you want in the way you ask the question? And I depended on that because I needed people to tell me how to commit my fraud without being co-conspirators. I needed to manipulate people into a position where they would give me the answers that I had to have. I'll never forget one time I got caught in my fraud dead to rights. And what had happened is actually kind of ludicrous. Now, I spent over $40 million in checks when I was at a company called the ZZ Best Carpet Cleaning Company, which was the second largest stock fraud until 1988. And now it would be just a pimple, but back then it was, you know, the old line, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, and pretty soon you're talking real money. And when I wrote these checks, I always used them to buy a cashier's check. And one day, an auditor came up to me and he said, "Mark, we can't find the copy of the cashier's check. We can't find the copy of the canceled check. We can't find the copy of the check that you bought, and we can't finish the audit until we find it." And so, being arrogant and in a big hurry, I ran into my office and manufactured a forged check and took it to them and handed it to them and said, "Here it is." And the check was made out to a bank. But a few moments later, a senior partner of the accounting firm walked in, and he had the canceled check because they had found it. And it wasn't made out to the bank. So a check for $59,117 on the exact same day went to two different people. And my auditor looked at me, should have known he caught me dead out. But then, for whatever reason, he started to apologize for me to all of the other accountants in the room. He said, "You know, I've watched Mark in action, and he writes so many checks, and he rushes out to that bank, and he gets a list every day of the checks he has to get cashed. And maybe, Mark, is it possible that you accidentally made a duplicate payment on that day?" And I said, "That's exactly what happened." They had me dead to rights, and they let me off the hook. And then I said to the senior partner, "Do you know what that means? That means this guy, because he's sharp and realized my mistake, has just found me $57,000 that I had inadvertently diverted to someone else." And then I said, "I'm going to give this guy a bonus." And I started to write him a check for $5,000. And the senior partner came over to me and he said, Mark, because they talk like that. He said, "You don't need to give him a bonus. You see, he was only doing his job. Because you see, Mark, that's what auditors do." And with that, they turned and walked away, thinking, "I bet Mark won't complain about his bill this month." They had me dead. Well, I turned and walked away too, but I was kind of, And I immediately went to a local drugstore where I purchased some Depends undergarments with wings. I didn't know what wings were, but I figured I'd better get them. And it was an example of being caught dead to rights in a fraud and then somebody letting me off the hook. And that sort of thing happens again and again. So I often tell people in business, you have to ask the right questions to find out if a fraud is happening. And those questions are usually followed by a simple question followed by a very accusatorial question. Where someone would ask me a question, like they go, "Mark, how do you make these outrageous profits?" And I would give a simple answer. I'd go, I buy low and sell high. That's a good answer. Buy low, sell high. Okay. But they would never say the next backup question, which is, now wait a minute, does everybody in your industry buy low and sell high? What magic thing do you know that nobody else knows? And if I go call 50 of your competitors, are they going to agree that, oh yes, you can make all this money by simply buying low and selling high? And I'd have never been able to answer that question. But nobody cared enough to give me the scrutiny to put my feet to the fire. Everybody was so busy explaining away my own shortcomings that they allowed me to behave unethically. And when faced with that challenge, I chose greed and avarice instead of doing the right thing. And that happens not just to accountants, even though that's who I talk to the most. It happens to everyone in business that I've ever known. People give answers when they should listen. People don't ask the tough questions. People accept bad answers when they get them. The formula for finding fraud is one that is so simple it's almost laughable. You know how you find fraud, all of you, for the rest of your life? You look for it. Duh. But you'd be surprised how many people don't bother to look for it. They will accept on face value almost any explanation or documentation. I can tell you that because I was in the front lines. I can tell you that because I don't like theory anymore. I like real cold hard facts, and mine are cold hard facts. I did it, and it was evil and wrong. And yet it's still being done to this day with WorldCom and Tyco and Adelphia and Enron and Sendit and Quest and Xerox and so many companies. And it was being done by Bernie Madoff and by another guy named Stanford, whose first name I can't remember right now. And they continue to play on people's greed and people's want. The only way a Bernie Madoff could guarantee a 12% profit return on a hedge fund is by breaking the law, because it can't be done. But look at all of the investors who couldn't look past their greed and chose to believe something that they never ever should have. They never asked the questions. They never said, what would be the ethical thing for me to do? Because it's easy to point to the victims of Bernie Madoff, but how many of them brought this victimology on themselves? It is incumbent on every person in this room to look for fraud, because when fraud happens, it undermines the very confidence of our country. One dishonest hedge fund has made people take money out of hundreds of honest ones. And that downward pressure is destroying the stock market and losing people millions. There's probably not a person in this room who either themselves or in some cases their parents aren't a lot poorer today than they were 5 months ago. There's a lot of people in this room that I talked to at the dinner tonight saying, I wanted to retire in 2 years. That ain't going to happen. And that all took place and is taking place as we speak because people committed fraud, and those that possibly could have stopped it didn't, and because virtually everybody involved in these things didn't behave ethically. Business ethics is not an oxymoron. And you can turn the negatives of greed and avarice into positives by simply saying to yourself, what is the ethical thing to do here? Can I be like Johnson & Johnson? Can I do the right thing even if short term it costs me some money? And if you can answer yes to that, you're well on your way. You know, these cliches my grandfather gave and the golden rule, they're all good because they're all true. Yeah, just treat everybody the way you want to get treated, and you're going to be okay. No one will ever defraud you. You'll be taking care of business and taking care of yourself. I think that a forum like this can be one of those epiphanies for some people. You can sit there and say, this ridiculous talk by this former criminal made me stop and think about something. Made me think that when the teacher leaves the room, do I ever cheat? Make me think, do I ever speed when I'm driving and rationalize it away. When the cashier gives you the wrong change for a 20 and you only gave her a 10, do you bring it to their attention? Because if every person can answer in the affirmative to those, then you can conquer the world. You can do anything. If you can't answer yes to that, you've got to ask yourself why. If you have to have the government intervene to force you to act ethically, then you're in trouble. I have been speaking like this for 15 or 16 years now, and I hope to keep on doing it for a great long time. And when I was in prison, I can't stand, so many of my stories begin with, when I was in prison. I can't stand it. But when I was in prison, I joined the Toastmasters Club. I jokingly say it was a good club for prison because we had a very active audience. And I enjoyed it tremendously. Prison is one big bore. Everyone has to work 8 hours a day. There's no television sets. And you get paid 7 cents an hour. So prison, bad place. But the Toastmasters Club gave me some place to go, and I joined that club. And I was fortunate enough to actually become the national champion speaker in 1993. And I was going to go to the international championships, but the warden didn't think it would look good having me in shackles. It's hard to make gestures when you're wearing handcuffs. You might want to write that down somewhere. And they taught me something in Toastmasters that I'll pass on to you. And then I want us to go to Q&A. Now, if nobody comes up and asks a question, we're just going to stare at each other for like 15 minutes because it is not right to go to an hour-long seminar on ethics and then leave early. That's unethical. So if you don't come up and ask me a question, I'll just tell old football stories. But at Toastmasters, they taught me something. They said, whenever you give a talk to an audience, never thank the audience. Their logic said the audience should thank you. But I break that rule every time I talk. I truly mean it. I thank you very much for such a good turnout and for listening. So thank you. And now if there's any questions at all, please step up to the mic. And go right ahead. Go right up to the mic.
I'm an attorney. I do a lot of criminal law. I've got some clients who have engaged in white-collar crime. I'm an attorney. I've got some clients who have engaged in white-collar crime, have gotten caught. Typically, as part of the sentence, there's an order of restitution. And my question to you is, was there an order of restitution in your case? What was it? And where are you on making restitution? Because it would seem to me an ethical thing to do would be make restitution.
Excellent question. I hope everybody heard it. I was fortunate, or unfortunate, during the time of my crime to have made a significant amount of money legally, almost $30 million. And what the federal government did, because I turned myself in, took full responsibility for what I did, they took every cent I made illegally, of course. And they simply said that every penny you made legally, we're going to take 2. And that's going to be your restitution. And that is a wonderful thing for someone like me because most of you don't know this. Why would you? But if you have an order of restitution, when you leave prison, you owe that money and you can owe it for life. And once you get out of prison, if your restitution is $25 million, you're never going to pay that off. And so what happens is for the rest of your working life, your paycheck doesn't come to you. It goes to the probation department in the federal government, and they give you an allowance. And the total never gets smaller because you can't even pay the interest. So when my attorney said, don't worry about them taking all your money, he said, they're going to take it anyway. And what they don't take, you're going to lose in civil judgments anyway. But he said, you know how to make money, and you'll make money again. And he said, you're really getting a break. And my co-defendant got out of prison owing about $30 million in restitution that he will never remotely come close to paying, and that cloud will hang over his head forever. But I did have restitution, and they literally took every penny I had. Now, I've had some people ask me, they said, well, didn't you hide some money? And I always say to them, what, like I'm going to tell you? Yeah, it's in my garage. Oops, you know, so no, I didn't hide any money, and I wouldn't tell you if I did. But excellent question. And I should also point this out, and this is not to embarrass you. I swear to you on a Bible it's not. One of my favorite stories about prison was I was with a very famous arbiter juror named Ivan Boski that I mentioned before. And he and I were talking one time, and I asked him when he did something that was rather stupid, I said, why didn't you get an opinion of counsel so you could rely on that and not as much trouble as you did? And he said, I don't know. He goes, let's ask my lawyer. He's right over here. So and I said, okay. And his accountant was in the next room. So, I mean, this was a class reunion. When I was in prison, another story that begins with, I had the most sought-after job in the prisons called town driver. I got to drive away from the prison every day without a guard and run errands for the warden. And as a perk, he let me pick all my own cellmates. And there were 8 men in my cell that I got to handpick. And listen to this cell. We had a federal judge. We had a state judge. We had a thoracic surgeon. We had a lawyer. No offense, but every room gets a lawyer. We had a businessman. We had myself, and we had a methamphetamine cook that we had for diversity. And this guy had done so much aluminum chloride that his skin was blue. And we called him our sanity barometer. Pretty good conversations in that room. We figured we could run any corporation in the world with that room. Later we got our own congressman. How's that? We lost a meth cook and stepped down and got a congressman. But the meth cook said to me in his own inimitable, beautiful voice, I don't understand what you guys are talking about. And as long as he didn't understand what we were talking about, we knew we were okay. So that's my story of my very diverse jail cell. Are there any other questions? Anything at all? Anything from anybody?
I teach business law here, and by day I'm a Franklin County prosecuting attorney. And I guess my question for you is, you appear to make light of your prison sentence. It doesn't sound like it was horrible. I'm sure you saw horrible things, but you had quite a bit of freedom. You weren't scared when you almost got caught by your own accountants. That didn't deter you from continuing. And you're now making lots of money on the lecture circuit. You don't believe that regulations should be in place because people should be innately ethical. What do you think, in light of everything that's gone on since you committed your crime and what continues to go on today, what is to deter these young people from doing what you did?
That's an excellent question. Why don't I take them quickly in order? First of all, I have a style. I actually apologize for it. This is my third talk today, and sometimes I forget what I've already said to the other groups. So I can assure you that I think I was properly hard on myself, as I completely deserve to be. I don't want to dwell on the prison stories, but it is a myth that there are white-collar prisons, and it is a myth that the minimum security prisons are a Camp Fluffy. The first day I got to prison, I had 3 death threats, and I was almost killed 4 times. I witnessed 4 murders that happened right in front of me, and so many rapes, it's hard to count. And when somebody's getting raped in the cafeteria, you just ignore it. You don't go over and butt in on it. Prison, I was in a maximum security prison for a short time, a medium security prison for 17 months, and a minimum security for the balance of my 53 months. And despite my levity, it was hell on earth a lot of the time. But when I got to prison, because I was the only, no, I got to tell you something. Out of the 400 white-collar inmates I did time with, I was the only guilty guy there. Everybody's innocent. Just ask them. And what I told Yank is the truth. I turned myself in and said, I did it, and I deserve whatever jail time that I get. But because of the style that I have, it sounds like sometimes I take things too lightly, and I deeply apologize for that. But I think what I was talking about is, it isn't that I'm opposed to regulation. In fact, I'm totally in favor of more regulation. But I look at it this way. The most regulated industry in America is medical. The second most regulated is banking. And those regulations didn't work. So stupidity is to continue doing something that doesn't work. So my solution is simply this to you, and very respectfully I mean this. Come up with new regulations. Come up with them tomorrow, and I'll salute them. But make sure that those regulations do what you want to do, because don't forget, we're in this mess because Enron and the subprime bank loan people used government-mandated accounting methods called mark-to-market to get us in this mess. It was a government regulation that helped fuel the fire that got us in this mess. So I'm totally in favor of regulation, as long as it's the right regulation. And lastly, I really mean this. I think that if we have to use a kind of harsh deterrence to get people to do the right thing, I think that's a mistake. And that's why I talk to groups, because I want to reach for their better hearts and say to them, why don't you do the right thing, not because somebody holds a gun to your head. So I hope that answers some of the question, and I hope it was satisfactory. And you're the closest I've been to a prosecutor in a long time. So please forgive me if I seemed a little nervous. Any last question or two? Anything at all?
For these undergraduates, let's put them ahead 4, 5, 7 years after they're out of here. They're doing well. They're the guy below the guy in the middle, as you indicated. I think you're sharp. Look for fraud. Keep your eyes and ears open. You see something, this person here amongst us sees something, can identify this, ask some tough questions. All right, what do you say to that person? Where and how high should he or she go? Just 1 step up? 2 steps up? How should that person, speaking to these young people getting into business, into anything else, make the next move? How do you move? Please, if you could think of that.
Okay, what I would like to say is one regulation that I would love to see newly defined and better enforced is the regulation to protect whistleblowers. The way the law reads now, you're supposed to have, every corporation is supposed to have a blind ombudsman type system whereby a person who suspects that they're being asked to do something fraudulent or think they see something fraudulent could report it. But companies are very lax about it. If there's one regulation we should pass tomorrow, is that there be a total way to find a way to ban reprisal. Because I guarantee you people at Enron who didn't get indicted saw stuff that made them suspicious. In my particular crime, on the work papers that the accountants did, where they hand wrote stuff in the margins as they were doing the work, they asked all the right questions. They didn't ask them of me, they asked them of each other. Why does Mark do this? How can we let him get it? What's going on here? But they were afraid. They didn't want to go to their bosses and say, we think Mark might be doing something wrong. Because then maybe I would have fired the accountants and they'd lose a $3 million account. And nobody wants to lose a $3 million account. What I will say is this. I've had 6 students from Pepperdine who all quit their jobs, and these were very, very high-paying jobs, because they were asked to do something that they felt compromised them. In all 5 cases, their bosses or CFOs got indicted. So if someone were to say, how high should I go? I go, if there's a protection there, as high as you can reach. But if there isn't, you have to at least report it, because as the lawyers will tell you, if you're aware of a felony in business, you must report it. Otherwise, you're aiding and abetting it, or obstructing. So it's a harsh thing to be able to draw that line. It's a tough thing to be 5 years on a job and take on a CFO or CEO. But I guarantee you, do you think there's one person that worked for Arthur Andersen that doesn't wish in the deepest cockles of their heart that they hadn't told Enron to go drop dead and take their $100 million a year check? That company's gone. So I think if there's illegal companies and unethical companies are the ones that'll fire you. Honest people are never upset if you take an action that seems to question their veracity. It's only dishonest people. When someone asks to see your identification before you cash a check, do you get mad? You don't say, what, you don't trust me? Because you're honest. So that's what you have to, and you know what it takes? Courage. It takes a lot of courage, and hopefully that's one of the lessons you learn at a place like this. This has been a very enjoyable day for me. I started the day talking to undergrad accounting majors, something I've never done before. I then talked to kind of an eclectic group in the afternoon of only students. And now I'm talking to this really wonderful crowd, and you've been gracious and really nice to come out. I'm flattered and very, very happy. And if any of you have gleaned even one thing from today, even just one little thing, then I did my job. Once again, thank you so very much.
Thank you very much for being part of this.